Hi, my name's Peter. I like motorcycles and motorcycle camping. Well, you can see today's not a great day for riding a motorcycle. So let's just talk about camping. This video is designed for beginners who are interested in getting into motorcycle camping. So I'm going to go over some of the basics. If you're an experienced motorcycle camper and you want to add some information to the comments, please go ahead and do so. So let's go inside and I'll make a video helping beginners to plan their motorcycle camping trips. So the first question is, what is motorcycle camping and why would I want to do it? Motorcycling is an immersive experience. When you're motorcycling, you're smelling, you're feeling, you're totally in the environment. So that's something that we love to do. And why not actually sleep in the environment as well? So motorcycle camping is bringing a tent, sleeping at a campground, being under the stars, and being present to the whole experience. And I love that. It's not for everybody. But if you want to get into motorcycle camping, the way to do it is to start small. You want to plan maybe a weekend trip, 1 or 2 nights. Get out there and get a feel for it. And then you get an idea about your equipment and all those other things, and you can worry less about breakdowns and getting stuck and all those other things that happen on longer trips. So the key is to start small. You can have private campgrounds, you have public campgrounds, and you have really more remote campgrounds. So private campgrounds generally have showers and really nice facilities, and they're more expensive. But state and provincial parks are really the best place to start because they're not that expensive. Here in British Columbia, it's usually about $25 a night. They may or may not have a shower, they may or may not have flush toilets, but they generally have well-maintained facilities for you to do that kind of business. And they'll have drinking water, running water available at a tap or a pump somewhere around the campground. So you don't have to worry too much about bringing water, which I'll talk about later. You don't have to worry about where you're going to go and do your thing. And you really have a nice campsite. So that's a really good way to get into it, is just to look for your local state or provincial park and visit one. Another reason why motorcycle camping is a really great practice is that there's a lot of camaraderie. When you're traveling on a motorcycle, people come and talk to you. I'm an introvert. I don't generally approach people, but people will approach me and they'll say, hey, where are you going? What are you doing? And I'll talk to them. And people will be either other motorcyclists or people in cars who also like motorcycles. So it's a really good way to meet people. If you're going to take your first trip and it's going to be a short one, then depending on where you are, you're going to look for somewhere that you're going to go, camp, come home. Maybe you're going to do 2 or 3 days on the road and do a small loop of 400 or 500 miles or 400 or 500 kilometers. And that's a great way to start. You don't have to plan to be one of these people who are going around the world. If that suits you, you better do a few short trips first to see whether it works. So you're going to have to carry your stuff. And the best thing is to have some motorcycle panniers. You can have hard panniers or soft panniers, and I've used both. On my Honda 250 that I don't have anymore, I use these old soft panniers that I bought on eBay for a couple $100. There's rackless panniers and there's rack panniers. You got to look at some more specialized videos that talk about all those different options. But the key is you don't just pile everything up on the back of your bike. Right? Because that will keep the weight very high, and the higher the weight is, the more unstable the bike is. So you're talking about putting an extra 100+ pounds on your bike, and that will destabilize the bike a bit. I always notice it when I leave home that the bike is more difficult to ride, and I get used to it pretty fast. If I've got the bike loaded correctly, then the weight will be low and that will keep the bike stable. Generally, the way I pack the bike is to keep the heaviest things low. So any tools that I have go at the bottom of the pannier, my camp stove and that stuff. And then I put my sleeping bag will go up high, my tent may go up high. And I keep actually the box on the back, my top box is as empty as I can keep it. So that's the place I can tuck in any food that I buy on the way, and it doesn't have as much weight in it. So you're going to need a tent and a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. And I have 3 tents, but I only take 2 on my motorcycle because one of my tents is a 4-person tent and it's a bigger tent. So you want to get a smaller tent, but I actually find that my 2-person tent is the ideal one because my 1-person tent that I bought for backpacking doesn't have room for me to bring in some of my gear. So if my gear is wet and I want to keep it out of the rain overnight and give it a chance to dry, I need to put that in my tent. So there's always quite a few things that you want to put in your tent. That's different than when you're a car camper and you can leave things in the car. Also, you don't get as wet when you're a car camper. So a 2-person tent is ideal. If you don't know anything about tents, then probably you want to do some research on tents before you make a decision. You don't have to spend a lot on a tent, but you do want to get a tent that's going to keep you dry in case of rain. Your sleeping pad, my sleeping pad is pretty thin, and that's enough for me, but some people like a pad that's just a couple inches thick. I can blow mine up with my breath, but a bigger pad requires a pump, and so there's some little portable pumps that you can get to pump up your pad. And that to me is one more complication that I like to avoid. And then there's things like pillows. I have a blow-up pillow. I used to use a small soft pillow, but the blow-up pillow is smaller when it's deflated and it holds my head up pretty well. For years and years, I would just use a stuffed sack with some clothing stuck in it for a pillow, and that's fine. So why spend more money when you're just trying this out? Once you start the process, you want to figure out what's the minimum you need and add to it as you go along, rather than forking out hundreds and hundreds of dollars. I mean, you could spend $1,000 on your equipment alone. So you want to start out with the minimum amount of equipment and make sure you build on that. That said, a good sleeping bag is a must. A good sleeping bag will last you for practically your lifetime. My sleeping bag is now more than 20 years old, and I don't think I'll ever replace it. I've probably got another, well, maybe 10 or 20 years left of camping, but the sleeping bag still works fine. I often have my motorcycle into a mechanic just before I go on a trip, even if the service is not due. I find that even though I do my own maintenance, I like to have a professional mechanic go over the bike at least once a year. A lot of people do an ABC check before they ride. That's the air, the brakes, and the chain. Now I ride every day, sometimes multiple times a day, so I don't do that every time I ride, but I do it at least once a week. Check the air, check the chain, and check that the brakes are working properly. But whenever I'm on a trip, I do these things every day. So a little bit of a check before I hit the road is really important to maintain my safety. Plus, when the bike is vibrating all day long, bolts can come loose. So I always check that things are tight. The only mechanical problems I've ever had on any of my trips have been with bolts coming loose. I've never had a disaster, but a lot of things can go wrong if a bolt comes loose. As far as flat tires go, if you're just testing the waters for motorcycle camping, then you would take the same precautions that you do for riding at home. You don't have to carry a tire repair kit all the time, but you may have to call a tow truck or a friend to pick you up if you get a flat tire. If you do carry a tire repair kit, you need to know how to use it, and for longer trips, that's definitely something that you're going to have to do. I always carry a small air pump just to add air to my tires in case they need it. I also carry an emergency jump start battery in case I have a battery failure. And that's just a little portable battery that can hook up to start an automotive battery. And I've used it to start cars. I've never had a problem with my bike. But that's something that I wouldn't leave home without. Okay, so you're going to have to eat while you're on the road. And you know, if you're just testing the waters out, it would be okay if you just go and eat at a restaurant. And oftentimes there is restaurants nearby campsites, but sometimes campsites can be in more remote places. Personally, I like to wake up in the morning and have a cup of coffee at my campsite. There's nothing that beats that cup of coffee as the sun rises and out in the wilderness. And that's one of my favorite moments of camping. So if you're going to make your own food and you're going to cook, you're going to need a little stove. I like the Coleman stoves because they run on Coleman fuel, and you can buy Coleman fuel almost anywhere that people are camping. You can buy them often at gas stations, but you can buy it at any camping supply store. You know, some people want to cook over a campfire, and that's a really rustic thing, but to be honest, It takes a long time to get your campfire to the right temperature and get it to burn the right way. That is good for cooking. Around here, there's a lot of fire bans during the summer because things are pretty dry, so you can't even have a campfire. So I wouldn't recommend thinking about having a campfire. Better is to use a stove. So you can cook freeze-dried meals that you can buy at any kind of camping supply store, but that's an expensive way to go. I like to just go like beans and cheese and tortilla wraps or canned stew, and that's a great way to have a meal that's not too expensive and easy to carry. I often have my lunches at restaurants because I'm on the road, but still cheese in a bun is a fine little lunch. So it's easy to cook and not spend too much money. You can check out my video on how much does it cost to motorcycle camp to get some idea about what I was spending on camping on my last big trip. So the other thing is you're going to need water. You want to have some water to drink while you're on the road, so you're going to have to carry some water. But even at campsites, at a provincial park or a state park, there will be water available. You're going to have to carry it back to your campsite. So at minimum, 2 or 3 water bottles would be good, or a collapsible water container is ideal. I like to use a collapsible water container that I strap to the outside of my bike, so I'm not putting water inside my pannier box. And one more thing about water, you're going to want to wash your dishes, and it's a really good idea to have a little sponge or cloth that you keep in a Ziploc bag, because that's going to be a bit damp, and you're going to want to use that. It's the best way to keep your dishes clean. So that brings me to safety and security. Now, one of the things that people always ask me is about bears, and I have a whole video about bears, so you can check that out. Here in Canada and lots of parts of the United States, black bears are common, and they'll come into campsites sometimes looking for food, but they're not really that aggressive, and most state and local parks will remove any problem bears and take them out to a more wild area. So I don't worry too much about that. Follow the basic rules, which is don't have food in or near your tent, and clean up your site before you go to bed so there's no food around that's going to attract any critters. Raccoons are a bigger problem than bears. They're not dangerous so much unless you corner them, but they will make a mess of all your gear. So make sure everything is all stowed away properly before you go to sleep, and you won't have a problem with any kind of critters. Have a little first aid kit and know how to use it. And that's just the same stuff that you would have at home. In an emergency, you're going to have to call for help. And that's why, if you're just starting off, again, you're in cell phone range, you might have to call for some help if you have a more serious injury. A little bit of aspirin or ibuprofen, some band-aids, bandages, something to clean out the dirt out of a wound or to disinfect it, and then you're fine. That's pretty much all you're going to need. And the other fear we have is the fear of people. And I just have to tell you that after years and decades of camping, I've never had a problem with another person at a campsite. All I can tell you in my experience is that people have been overwhelmingly helpful and friendly when I've been camping. And I've been surprised time and time again about how generous and caring people are. So I really think that when we're out there camping, we're going to see the best in people. And if you go with that attitude, you're going to have a great time. So I highly encourage you to try motorcycle camping. And I'll see you on the road. Thanks. Bye.